They demanded my house to save my fraudster sister. I refused. So they broke in with baseball bats, but the house was no longer mine. The ringtone shattered the silence of our apartment at exactly 3 in the morning. I did not jolt awake. Nearly a decade as a forensic accountant had trained my mind to process sudden, unsettling information with cold detachment. Beside me, my fiancée, Olivia, shifted beneath the duvet without waking. I slipped out of bed, crossed the dark hallway, and picked up the phone glowing on the kitchen counter. The number was unfamiliar, but the area code belonged to my old hometown, a place I had deliberately left behind 5 years earlier. I answered without saying hello and waited. For a moment, all I heard was heavy breathing and the faint crackle of police radio static. Then, a deep, tired voice identified himself as Officer James from the local precinct. He asked whether he was speaking to Arthur. I confirmed my name, and he asked if I owned the property on Maple Drive. My heartbeat changed slightly. Rather than answer, I asked him to explain why he was calling about that address. He sighed, then told me that an older man and woman had been arrested there less than an hour earlier. They had smashed the back sliding glass door with baseball bats, entered the house, and spent roughly 20 minutes destroying everything they could reach. They shattered the television, punched holes through the drywall, overturned the dining table, destroyed the kitchen appliances, and went upstairs to pour bleach across the carpets. The estimated damage was already close to $40,000. Then he gave me their names: Robert and Patricia, my father and mother. According to Officer James, a terrified neighbor had called the police after hearing glass breaking and furniture crashing. When the patrol cars arrived, my parents did not run. They stood in the ruined living room, breathing hard, still holding the bats, and acted as though they had performed a public service. My mother announced that they were teaching their ungrateful son a lesson. They told the officers I had abandoned my family, hoarded money while my sister suffered, and deserved to have my precious house destroyed. They were so convinced of their moral righteousness that they practically presented their wrists for handcuffs, apparently expecting the police to understand. Officer James paused, waiting for me to panic. I took a slow breath and pictured two people in their late 60s raging through a house they believed belonged to me. Then I told him I felt sorry for whoever would have to clean up the destruction. He asked what I meant. I explained the detail my parents had missed. I did not own the house on Maple Drive. I had completed the sale exactly 32 days earlier, transferred the funds, and surrendered the keys to a corporate development company that had purchased the property as an investment. My parents had not destroyed my home. They had broken into a stranger's property, committed multiple felonies, and caused $40,000 in damage to a corporation with an aggressive legal department. Officer James exhaled sharply, half in disbelief and half in amusement. He muttered that people never ceased to surprise him. I offered to email the closing statement, transfer records, and final deed documents for his report, but made it clear that I had no legal or personal connection to the crime scene. I was not the complainant, I was not the current owner, and I had no interest in speaking to the two people sitting in his holding cell. Whatever explanation they wanted to give could be delivered to the corporation whose house they had destroyed. Then I ended the call and placed my phone face down on the marble counter. The apartment became silent again, but my mind was moving at full speed. I started the coffee maker and let the bitter scent of dark roast settle me. Leaning against the counter, I allowed myself a small smile. It was not joyful. It was the grim satisfaction of watching an equation resolve exactly as predicted. Every action creates a reaction. Every debit has a credit. My parents had spent their lives believing that intention excused damage and that family loyalty protected them from consequences. Now they were facing charges for breaking and entering, vandalism, and destruction of private property because they thought they had the right to punish me. Olivia appeared in the doorway, tying the belt of her silk robe and asking who would call at that hour. I poured 2 mugs of coffee and told her everything. As a contract lawyer, she understood liability better than almost anyone. She listened without theatrics, then observed that a corporate owner would show no emotional leniency. An individual homeowner might be swayed by 2 elderly defendants crying about family conflict. A corporation would file an insurance claim, and the insurer would pursue every dollar of restitution. My parents had trapped themselves in a legal and financial nightmare, with no easy exit. We sat at the island while city lights reflected in the windows. Olivia approached the situation the way she approached a contract dispute. The corporate owner would document every broken appliance, every square foot of ruined carpet, and every damaged wall. Its insurer would pay the claim, then seek reimbursement through subrogation. No one in that chain would care that the vandals were elderly or that they claimed to be angry parents. Each party would simply move the loss down the line until it landed on the people responsible. Olivia then asked how my parents could possibly justify something so extreme. To me, the answer was obvious. For years, they had demanded that I sacrifice my life and assets to repair my sister's failures. When I finally established a boundary, their version of reality fractured. They could not admit they were wrong because that would require admitting they had enabled one child while exploiting the other. It would mean acknowledging that Nicole's repeated disasters were not bad luck and that my refusal was not cruelty. So they rewrote the story and made me the villain, the greedy, heartless son who needed punishment. Destroying what they believed was my success was their desperate way of protecting themselves from the truth. My independence had become evidence of their failure, and they wanted to erase it. I had stopped feeling pity for them long ago. As dawn turned the windows pale gray, I felt only closure. The chain connecting me to them had finally been severed by their own spectacular incompetence. Olivia covered my hand with hers and asked whether I was all right. I looked at the woman who had built a life with me through respect, honesty, and calm strength, and told her the truth. I had never been better. To understand why their arrest felt like a perfectly balanced ledger, you have to go back 5 years, to the night my family decided my financial security was merely an emergency fund for my sister's fantasies. I was 28 and living through a relentless cycle of audits, spreadsheets, and delayed gratification. I worked 60 to 70 hours a week as a junior forensic accountant at a mid-sized firm. My job was to examine the wreckage of failed businesses and find the exact point where the money disappeared. I traced hidden accounts, unraveled embezzlement schemes, and learned that people lied constantly while numbers remained stubbornly honest. I treated my own finances with the same discipline. I lived in a cramped one-bedroom apartment that smelled faintly of old plumbing. I drove a 10-year-old sedan that rattled whenever I reached 60 miles per hour. I rarely ate in restaurants, never took expensive vacations, and saved every spare dollar. My goal was simple: buy a house with a massive down payment so I would never spend 3 decades crushed beneath a mortgage. By that Saturday dinner, I had accumulated exactly $120,000 in a high-yield savings account. It represented years of long nights, skipped pleasures, and careful decisions. It was not idle money. It was armor. My sister Nicole lived at the opposite extreme. She was 3 years older, but emotionally she had never progressed beyond adolescence. She was the golden child, protected from every consequence and celebrated for every mediocre effort. Our parents taught her that the world owed her comfort simply because she wanted it. She married Jason, a man perfectly suited to her. He always had a grand business idea and never possessed the discipline to execute one. Together they formed a financial black hole. Before that dinner, they had already launched and destroyed 2 businesses. The first was an organic, gluten-free bakery that collapsed in 8 months after they spent most of their capital on luxury espresso equipment and forgot to reserve enough for marketing or payroll. The second was a dog walking app that failed because neither of them wanted to walk dogs or manage the contractors who would. Both times, my parents rescued them. They drained retirement accounts, refinanced their home, and paid creditors so Nicole would never experience bankruptcy. Each rescue was described as a temporary act of support, yet every dollar taught Nicole the same lesson. Failure had no cost as long as someone else still possessed money. My parents absorbed the losses, complained privately about stress, and then publicly praised her courage for trying again. I watched the money burn and said nothing because, in our family, exposing a mistake was treated as a greater betrayal than making it. That evening, over the smell of overcooked pot roast, I noticed everyone was suspiciously cheerful. Nicole and Jason could barely sit still. My mother wore a bright, manic smile. My father poured wine with the solemn ceremony that usually preceded disaster. Patricia tapped her glass and announced that Nicole and Jason had discovered a brilliant opportunity. They had supposedly spent months building a foolproof plan for a boutique lifestyle consultancy. This, my mother declared, would finally make them millionaires. I kept cutting my meat. I had audited enough failed companies to recognize a sinking ship before launch. Nicole leaned toward me with wide, earnest eyes and explained that they had the passion, branding, and connections. The only missing piece was seed capital. Banks, she said, were being unreasonable about collateral. Then she revealed the real purpose of dinner. In her sweetest voice, she said she knew I had been saving, and that roughly $120,000 was sitting in an account doing nothing. She proposed that I invest every cent in her consultancy. Without market research, financial projections, or credible evidence, she promised to double my money within 2 years. The dining room went silent, except for the refrigerator humming in the kitchen. 4 people stared at me, expecting the quiet, dependable younger brother to write a check and surrender his future. I placed my knife and fork on the plate and approached the conversation as I would an audit. I asked Nicole for her projected burn rate during the first 2 quarters. I asked how she planned to acquire clients without a track record, what she expected to spend on office space compared with remote operations, and how she intended to manage state tax obligations for the LLC. Her visionary smile vanished. She blinked, looked at Jason for help, and found him studying his shoes. Finally, she muttered that branding was the important part, and accountants could handle the boring details later. I told her that a business plan without a financial foundation was not a plan. It was a wish list. I reminded her of the bakery and the app, both launched with confidence and destroyed by incompetence. I explained that giving $120,000 to 2 people who could not manage a basic ledger would be the worst investment I had ever seen. Then I said the word no one at that table expected. No. Nicole immediately reached for the only strategy she had mastered. She denied, attacked, and reversed victim and offender. Her face collapsed into theatrical grief. She slammed both hands on the table, knocked over a glass, and screamed that I was arrogant and selfish. She accused me of wanting her to fail so I could feel superior. Jason pointed at me and called me a terrible brother for refusing to believe in my own blood. My mother rushed to embrace Nicole and glared at me as though I had assaulted her. She said family supported family no matter what, and that my money meant nothing if I would not use it to make my sister's dream possible. I watched them demand that I set myself on fire to keep them warm, then expressed genuine outrage because I refused to light the match. My father stood, face red and neck veins bulging, and pointed toward the door. He said that in his family, people took care of their own. If I would not write the check, then I was a selfish, calculating bastard and no longer his son. He ordered me out and told me never to return until I was ready to apologize and hand over the money. They expected the threat of losing my family to break me. Instead, I felt absolute clarity. I saw them not as loved ones, but as a toxic liability that would consume my money, energy, and peace until nothing remained. I stood, removed the spare key to their house from my keyring, and dropped it on the table. I had carried that key since I was a teenager, through college, my first job, and every family dinner I had endured. The metallic click against the wood cut through the shouting more effectively than any speech. It was the sound of access ending. Without another word, I turned, walked through the front door, and left them with the ultimatum they had expected to frighten me. The cool air struck my face, and I felt lighter than I had in years. The next morning, I changed my phone number, blocked their email addresses, and cut every digital and physical connection. I protected my assets and my peace. A year later, I used the $120,000 as a large down payment on the house on Maple Drive. I advanced at work, met Olivia, and built a stable life. For 5 uninterrupted years, my family became nothing more than a closed chapter. I rose to senior forensic accountant and specialized in corporate fraud, invisible money trails, and financial predators who believed clever paperwork placed them above the law. My personal life was equally steady. Olivia and I fell in love because neither of us played games. We respected boundaries, communicated directly, and treated trust as something valuable. I did not miss my relatives. I did not monitor their lives. Occasionally, when auditing a toxic family business, I remembered them as a cautionary example. Otherwise, I was free. Then, on a gray Tuesday afternoon in early October, I was cleaning the spam folder of an old email account used for subscriptions and junk. A subject line stopped my hand on the mouse. Emergency. Please come home. Life or death. The sender was my mother. My first instinct was to delete it unopened. The investigative part of my mind, however, wanted to verify the claim. The message itself was frantic but vague. Nicole was supposedly in terrible danger. They had nowhere else to turn. I needed to come immediately. If someone was truly dying, basic human decency required that I confirm the facts. I replied with one detached sentence, stating that I would meet them at noon on Saturday. When I returned to the old neighborhood, the first thing I saw was a contradiction large enough to shine in the overcast light. Parked in my parents' driveway were a new Mercedes-Benz and a pristine Porsche Macan, together representing well over $150,000 in depreciating luxury. I parked on the street, followed the familiar path, and knocked. My mother opened the door almost immediately. 5 years had deepened the lines in her face, but her eyes lit with desperate, calculating relief. She hurried me into the living room, where the entire cast waited. My father sat in his usual recliner, grim and authoritative. Nicole and Jason occupied the sofa. Nicole wore expensive athleisure clothing and had red, swollen eyes, as if she had prepared carefully for the role of victim. I remained near the entryway and asked them to explain the life-or-death emergency. My mother began crying into a tissue. She said Nicole's consultancy had collapsed 3 months earlier after borrowing heavily from private investors. Now, according to her, those investors were violently demanding repayment. I asked Nicole for the exact amount. She stared at her hands and whispered, $250,000. I asked who would lend $250,000 without hard collateral. Jason answered with a trembling voice that sounded rehearsed. He claimed the lenders were dangerous, off-the-books people who knew their address and daily routines. They had supposedly threatened terrible violence if the debt was not paid by the end of the month. I looked through the window at the driveway and suggested they begin by selling the Porsche and Mercedes. Nicole's victim mask slipped. She snapped that they needed the cars for networking, appearances, and future business opportunities. Then my father stood and revealed the actual plan. In the same domineering tone he had used 5 years earlier, he said they knew I owned an expensive house in the city. Family helped family during a crisis, he declared. I was to sell my home immediately, use the equity to pay Nicole's $250,000 debt, and rent a small apartment with whatever remained. I let the silence stretch, then asked whether he was truly demanding that I make myself effectively homeless to cover my sister's unsecured debt while she refused to sell a luxury vehicle. My mother stepped forward, her voice sharpening. I was young, she said. I could always buy another house. Nicole's life was in danger now, and saving her was my moral duty as a brother. I did not shout or debate. I looked at all four of them and said they were completely out of their minds. Then I walked out, got into my car, and drove away. I was not frightened by the alleged loan sharks. I felt a cold urgency. The moment my father demanded my house, I knew a simple refusal would not end the harassment. In my family, denied entitlement fermented into obsession. They knew I owned a valuable asset and would keep trying to guilt, pressure, threaten, or humiliate me until I surrendered it. They would appear at my door. They would create scenes. They would attack my peace. The target had to disappear. The instant I reached home, I called my real estate broker and instructed him to list the property immediately. I understood that a rapid sale at a discount might leave money on the table, but losing 5% voluntarily was preferable to keeping a target my family believed they could seize. I wanted an all-cash buyer capable of closing within 30 days. To force a rapid transaction, I authorized a price 5% below current market value. On a premium house in a desirable neighborhood, that discount attracted corporate buyers like blood and water. Within 48 hours, a large development firm made an aggressive cash offer for its rental portfolio. We signed preliminary documents the following day. For the next 3 weeks, I packed my life into boxes with quiet precision. Olivia and I had already discussed living together after our engagement, so the crisis only accelerated the plan. I moved my furniture, personal belongings, and office equipment into her secure, access-controlled high-rise apartment. When the sale closed, the proceeds went directly into a newly established, heavily protected trust account under my management. By the end of the month, the Maple Drive house belonged entirely to a faceless corporation. My wealth was insulated, and my family had no idea the target was gone. Once the asset was secure, professional curiosity took over. The story about violent investors made no financial sense. Real criminals did not casually lend $250,000 to failed lifestyle consultants without physical collateral. Nicole and Jason were lying. I intended to determine exactly how. From my new office, I accessed public business registries, state tax databases, property records, lien indexes, and county civil court systems. I searched company names, alternate registrations, old addresses, officers, and related entities. The work was not illegal or mysterious. It was the same disciplined comparison of public records I performed professionally every day. In less than 3 hours, their entire performance collapsed. First, I found the lawsuit. No criminal syndicate was hunting them. A legitimate commercial investment fund called Apex Horizon Capital had sued Nicole's company for defaulting on a standard business loan. It was a straightforward breach of contract case. No one planned to break their legs. Their credit, accounts, and remaining assets were the only things at risk. Then, I followed the company's filings through tax liens and property records and discovered the real crime. Nicole and Jason had not lost all the borrowed capital through ordinary incompetence. They had siphoned it into secondary shell accounts connected to an alternate version of Jason's name and an old, supposedly defunct company. Nearly $180,000 remained hidden. They were intentionally defaulting on the Apex Horizon loan and preparing to declare corporate bankruptcy, hoping to erase the debt while preserving the stolen money for their luxury lifestyle. The Mercedes, the Porsche, the expensive clothes, and the carefully maintained appearance of success were not remnants of a business tragedy. They were being supported by capital that belonged to someone else. Nicole's story about violent lenders was designed to manufacture urgency, bypass scrutiny, and turn my parents into emotional enforcers. They did not need my home equity to survive. They wanted me to pay the settlement so they could keep their secret cash and expensive cars. They were attempting to make me the sacrificial lamb for their financial fraud. I printed every court filing, business registration, transfer record, routing trace, and tax document. I organized the evidence in a thick 3-ring binder. Then I decided to confront them, but not in my parents' living room, where tears and shouting had always replaced facts. Through Olivia's receptionist, I sent a formal invitation to a meeting about resolving the financial issue involving my property. The meeting would take place at Olivia's law firm in a glass and steel tower in the financial district. I wanted them in an environment where emotional manipulation had no authority. They arrived on time, eager to collect what they believed was owed. Security escorted my parents, Nicole, and Jason into a mahogany-paneled conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Olivia sat in the corner as my legal counsel, a yellow pad on her lap. I occupied the head of the table in a charcoal suit, hands resting on the closed binder. They looked uncomfortable, but tried to project confidence. My parents sat upright with righteous expressions. Nicole started sniffling before anyone spoke. Jason kept glancing at the heavy glass door. My father cleared his throat and removed a professionally prepared document from his briefcase. He slid it across the table with an air of triumph and announced that they had hired a lawyer to draft a durable power of attorney. Once I signed, my parents would have authority to manage the sale of my house, approve documents in my name, and distribute the proceeds directly to Nicole's alleged creditors. They had not come to request help or negotiate terms. They had arrived assuming my consent and had reduced my role to providing a signature. They had even arranged the theft of my choice, so I would not have to concern myself with logistics. My mother smiled, as though praising a child. She said she was proud that I had finally grown up and decided to protect my family. Nicole released a rehearsed sob, thanked me, and claimed the dangerous men had called again the previous day, threatening to burn down her house. I looked at the power of attorney without touching it. The silence grew long enough for their certainty to crack. Then I pushed the document away and opened my binder. Looking directly at Nicole, I said I found it fascinating that violent, kneecap-breaking mobsters operated under the name Apex Horizon Capital. The blood drained from her face. Jason flinched and gripped the table until his knuckles whitened. I read the exact state civil court docket number aloud and explained to my parents that there were no loan sharks and no physical threats. There was only a commercial lender pursuing a breach of contract claim against Nicole's LLC. Then I turned to the next section and slid a highlighted spreadsheet across the table. I named the 3 shell accounts, read the routing details, listed the transfer dates, and identified the precise amounts. I explained how Nicole and Jason had moved $180,000 of investor funds into hidden accounts to manufacture insolvency. I told my parents the truth without softening a word. Their golden child was not a terrified victim. She was a calculated fraudster, preparing to commit bankruptcy fraud. And they had brought a power of attorney into my fiancé's law firm, expecting me to sell my home and subsidize her crime. The room erupted. Nicole screamed that I had hacked her computer, violated her privacy, and fabricated the evidence. These tears were real, produced not by sorrow but by cornered panic. Jason jumped up, pointed at me, and insisted I did not understand modern business. Moving the money, he shouted, was merely strategic asset management. My father slammed his fist against the table hard enough to rattle the cups. What mattered most was what he did not do. He did not turn toward Nicole and ask why she had lied about loan sharks. He did not demand to know where the hidden money was. He did not apologize for ordering me to sell my home. He was not furious at Nicole for deceiving him. He was furious at me for exposing her and refusing to obey. He called me treacherous, cold-blooded, and incapable of family loyalty. He threatened to ruin my professional reputation, promised to come to my house, and said he would physically force me to respect my elders. I closed the binder with a sharp snap, stood, and buttoned my jacket. I told him he had 60 seconds to remove his fraudulent daughter, complicit son-in-law, and enabling wife before building security removed all of them for trespassing. As I turned toward the door, I added one final fact. They should not bother visiting my house to teach me a lesson because I had sold it for cash 3 weeks earlier. I left them in the conference room surrounded by the wreckage of their lies. That meeting led directly to the call from Officer James. My father's fragile ego could not survive being exposed and dismissed by the son he had thrown away. He could not accept that his authority meant nothing to me, or that his golden child was a criminal. Learning that I had sold the house stripped him of the last illusion of control. In his distorted mind, the only way to restore his power was to hurt me and destroy something I valued. My parents hired a cheap private investigator to locate my residence. What none of them understood was that county property records could take weeks to reflect a rapid cash sale. The investigator performed a lazy search, found Maple Drive still associated with my name, and gave them the outdated address. Blinded by rage and entitlement, my parents loaded baseball bats into their car, drove to my old neighborhood in the middle of the night, and attacked a house owned by someone else. The legal and financial consequences were catastrophic. As Olivia predicted, the corporation that owned the property showed no mercy. Its insurers and attorneys pursued the case as a matter of profit, loss, and liability. There were no sentimental discussions about elderly parents making a mistake. My parents faced multiple felony charges, including breaking and entering, severe vandalism, and destruction of private property. Their overwhelmed public defender negotiated a brutal plea agreement that narrowly kept them out of state prison. They received strict, multi-year probation and were ordered to pay full restitution. The ruined walls, flooring, appliances, furniture, and carpets accounted for approximately $40,000. Court costs, probation fees, and defense expenses raised their total liability to roughly $60,000. They did not have $60,000. Years of rescuing Nicole had emptied their retirement and emergency accounts. To satisfy the court order and avoid incarceration, they had to sell their own home. It was the same house where my father had stood in the dining room 5 years earlier and declared that I was no longer his son. They sold their lifelong sanctuary to pay for a violent crime committed while trying to destroy mine. The balance was so exact that it felt less like revenge than mathematics. News traveled quickly through the old neighborhood. I never hired anyone to investigate. Former neighbors, distant relatives, and mutual acquaintances volunteered every detail of the collapse. After paying the court, attorneys, and restitution, my parents retained only a small amount of equity from the forced sale. In one final act of astonishing enablement, they gave that remaining money to Nicole to help settle the Apex Horizon lawsuit and keep her away from federal prosecution. Even after she lied to them, manipulated them, and indirectly cost them their home, they continued to treat her as the victim. Now all four of them live together in a cheap, poorly maintained two-bedroom apartment near the industrial edge of town. A former neighbor who saw them at a grocery store said the tension among them was unbearable. Nicole and Jason remain unemployed, refuse ordinary jobs, and complain that the universe has treated them unfairly. My parents, who should be enjoying retirement, work exhausting minimum wage retail shifts in their late 60s to cover rent and groceries. They live day-to-day inside a prison constructed entirely from their own decisions. Blocked numbers still leave voicemails. Filtered messages collect in my spam folder. My mother cries that they finally understand the truth, that they made an unforgivable mistake, and that she wants the family reunited. My father rambles about forgiveness, moving forward, and how deeply they miss me. Neither of them begins with a full acknowledgement of what they did. Their apologies always drift toward their rent, their exhausting jobs, their age, and the difficulty of living with Nicole and Jason. Even remorse becomes another request for rescue. I delete the messages without reaching the end. There is no future with people who view your existence as a line of credit. They are not sorry they demanded my house. They are not sorry they tried to destroy my security or punish me for refusing to fund a crime. They are sorry the plan failed. They are sorry consequences arrived. Most of all, they are sorry they are poor. I now stand on the wide balcony of the high-rise apartment I share with Olivia, looking across a city filled with lights and possibility. We are finalizing the catering menu and guest list for our wedding next spring. My career is thriving. My assets are secure. My mind is quiet. People often repeat that blood is thicker than water and insist that family must always be forgiven because it is the only family you will ever have. That idea becomes dangerous when it is used to tether victims to people who exploit them. True family is not defined by genetics. It is built through respect, trust, honesty, and the determination to protect one another's physical, financial, and emotional well-being. I drew one hard financial boundary, and it became a mirror reflecting exactly who my relatives were. I did not destroy my family. I handed them the final ledger, and they bankrupted themselves.